My name is Nathan, and today I'll be presenting my ethics presentation on human embryo gene editing. The main ethical question I'm looking at is, should scientists be allowed to gene edit human embryos? So, recently, about a month or two ago, researchers tested a newer type of gene editing on early human embryos. They wanted to see if this method could change DNA more precisely than the traditional previous way of doing it. The study results were promising because the researchers were able to avoid some major DNA damage, and some embryos did develop normally. But the study also showed some serious concerns, such as uneven editing and off target edits. This raises questions on whether this kind of technology should ever be used in pregnancy. So, who is affected by this study? The first group affected is the embryos themselves and any future children if this technology is ever used for pregnancy. Genetic changes could have lifeline physical consequences. The second are the parents. The parents are affected because some may want to use this technology to prevent some severe genetic conditions in their children. The third are the future generations that are also affected because changes to embryos may be passed down through family lineage. The last one is society as a whole. They can be affected because technology could create some major ethical, legal, and social questions about what kind of genetic editing should be even allowed. Now, the ethical actors and action in this. The ethical actors are the Columbia University researchers and the scientific collaborators. Eventually, if this technology does move into medical use, the fertility clinic directors and doctors would also become major ethical actors. The scientists have a serious responsibility because they are working with technology that could eventually alter the human germline. The action being tested is their decision to use this type of editing on early human embryos in a research setting. They were not trying to create a pregnancy, they were testing whether a newer gene editing method might be safer for embryos and help scientists understand early human embryo DNA repair. But more success in this field could eventually lead to more embryo editing for serious inherited genetic diseases, for example. The ethical standard that I use for this is the Belmont Report. This standard is useful because this case involves biomedical research and human embryos. The first principle is respect for persons. This asks whether embryo donors were treated with consent and respect. It also raises the question of the future child who cannot consent if this technology is later used for pregnancy. The second principle is beneficence. This asks whether the research creates enough possible medical benefit to justify the risks. The third principle is justice. This asks whether the benefits and risks of embryo editing would be shared fairly or whether this technology would mainly benefit wealthy people. Now, the argument for embryo editing is that scientists could eventually prevent severe inherited genetic disorders before a child is born. If used correctly, this technology could help families avoid passing on serious diseases. And this approach also has the potential to reduce a lot of human suffering connected to these genetic conditions. For the ethical standard, which is beneficence, embryo editing may be ethical if it creates major medical benefits while reducing harm. However, this argument is strongest only when the editing is limited to serious disease prevention, not enhancement traits of a human. The argument against embryo editing is that future children cannot consent to permanent genetic changes made before they were born. This creates a major problem under respect for people in the ethical standard. There are also serious safety risks involved, like off target edits and uneven editing, where not every cell has the same genetic change. Another concern is social inequality. If only wealthy people can access this technology, embryo editing could create inequality. There's also fear of designer babies, where people begin editing embryos for non medical traits. This could treat human life like a product instead of respecting future children as people. So, the connection I made to this project is a book I read last year called Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. In the book, it shows a society where human reproduction is controlled and people are engineered for specific social roles. The embryo editing study is not doing that, but it raises a similar ethical fear. Once scientists can edit embryos safely, society may move from preventing diseases to selecting traits like intelligence, physical appearance, or things like athletic ability. This connects to in the ethical standard of justice because the technology could create inequality, and it connects to respect for people because future children could be treated as design products instead of human beings with their own dignity. Now, the ethical test and conclusion for this is that if we do apply the ethical standard, the answer is not that simple. The beneficence supports embryo editing if it can prevent severe suffering from serious genetic diseases. However, respect for people and justice requires us to be careful about the consent, safety, and fair access. My conclusion is that embryo gene editing should not be completely rejected, but it should be limited. What should be allowed is carefully regulated research and possibly in the future editing only for very serious genetic disease prevention under strict safety standards. What should be forbidden is editing embryos for non-medical enhancement traits such as intelligence, physical appearances, etc. Similar to the warning in the Brave New World book. This could lead to serious ethical problems, social inequality, and treating children as design products. Thank you for listening and watching. Bye.